Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be one of the last of the 10 recent reads wrap-ups that I'm doing, and this covers, I think, books 2 through 11 that I read in December. So a lot of these are pretty positive, I think, and I'll be honest, I didn't take notes a while, right after I read them, so I had kind of mentioned in a recent video that I had been really behind on reviews, and by that I mean I had 20 reviews I needed to write, so a lot of these I think are not as descriptive. We'll start from the lowest rated and work our way up to the highest. So the lowest rated is a 3-star book, so pretty positive overall. And that is Henderbell by J.D. Netto. So this is essentially a portal fantasy that's set around Christmas time, where our main character's grandparents are kidnapped by these shadow spirits. And so our main characters, Enzo and Ava, set off to save them and kind of discover, this whole world of Henderbell, and they need to save that world as well. So I really liked this setting around Christmas. I did read it around Christmas, so that was the perfect time for that. I really liked this world of Henderbell as well. There are certainly some darker things here, so it's kind of like a darker take on portal fantasy, and I had seen some comparisons, I think, to the Chronicles of Narnia. I think mostly in that it's also, a portal fantasy, and there's kind of a Christmassy setting, I guess, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So compared to that, I think this definitely has some darker themes to it. And, there are some content warnings, I think, for really toxic families. I will say I could have used some more world development here. I don't think I really got the best sense of it, even though I did like what we had. I just could have used more, I think. And I think the plot also seems to take a little bit to really get going for me. So, they kind of, Enzo and Ava get to Henderbell and then just kind of talk for a while. And then, it took a long time for the action to really start. So for that, I think the pacing could have been a little bit more consistent for me. And also, the ending is a bit of a cliffhanger ending, and I read it and I was like, oh, wow, okay. That was not what I was expecting, and I did really enjoy that ending. Follow 3 points of view characters, that's Enzo, Ava, and then another character in Henderbell. And I think each chapter rotated between the 3, if I'm remembering that right. And so I will say, I did prefer some sections more than others. I didn't particularly care for Enzo, but I think Ava's sections were interesting, as well as this other character who's, in Henderbell. So, overall, I did enjoy my time with it. Sure, there are things that, could have, improved my experience with it, the pacing in particular, and just, world building. But this is a fairly short book as well, so I think, there's only so much you can really do in that page count. But it's, I think, an interesting enough world that I would be open to reading more in this, in this setting, especially after, I mentioned, after that cliffhanger ending. Now we move to a 3.5-star book, and that is In the Hall with the Knife, and this is by Diana Peterfreund, I think. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And this was actually a Christmas present from Kasha, from Kasha's Book Cemetery, which was very sweet of her. And so this is essentially a close circle murder mystery based on the game Clue, which I think is called Cluedo in the UK and or maybe in other places of the world. So we're essentially set at this elite prep school, and all of our classic Clue characters, we have Finn Plum, Mrs. White, the headmaster is Mr. Body, and so basically, we have a murder. The title kind of gives you a hint of what happened, but I thought this was really fun. This kind of reminds me of Riverdale type vibes, where you have, just murder and teens at this elite prep school, so I thought that was super fun. This definitely kept me interested the entire time. I thought this was a super fun adaptation of this board game, and especially, adapting the characters to these, prep school students. And, Mrs. White and Mr. Body are both adults in this, but I thought generally you can kind of get a better sense of their personalities than necessarily the game itself, obviously. But it kind of, I think the tone reminded me of the movie version of Clue, which I don't know if anybody has seen, but it's really funny and very enjoyable. It's definitely kind of the same tone, I think, of that movie. It's a little bit cheesy, but I really enjoyed it. It kind of embraced that and went with it, so I'm here for that. There's obviously lots of drama. We have a winter storm that hits, and so I thought it was perfect to read during the winter. In terms of closed circle murder mysteries, I don't think that this is like the hardest one to guess. Like, it's fairly easy, I guess, to kind of understand what's going on, but I still thought it was super fun, and I will definitely continue this. I think it's supposed to be a trilogy. I could be wrong about that, but definitely want to check out more. So now we get into the 4-star books, and there's a large chunk of these. So the first one I'll talk about is In a Holidaze by Christina Lauren. So this is a romance that is essentially like a Groundhog Day Christmas romance that takes place at this cabin in Utah, where our main character May must find out how to kind of like break free of this, you know, time circle, I guess, and find her true love. So I thought this was a fun Christmas romance, and in general, like, this has been true of all the Christina Lauren books I've read so far. Like, I've really enjoyed their writing. I think it's very funny and engaging. I will say there wasn't as much of this whole time loop stuff as I really expected, so I'm like a little bit bummed about that. It was over faster than I had anticipated. In Groundhog Day and what is the movie? Palm Springs, I think, that just recently came out, which is really funny. You know, they're trapped in this loop for a lot longer, and so that was kind of what I was anticipating with this as well. I really liked the Christmas traditions here, and just kind of generally, you know, being with family, and May kind of discovering what really matters. I really liked this setting. So it takes place up in, I think, Park City. So I went to undergrad at the University of Utah, which is in Salt Lake City. And so, like, I'm very familiar with Salt Lake and Park City. So I think part of my enjoyment of this book really comes from the fact that I'm, like, very familiar, you know, with this setting. I thought that was very special, I suppose. I did ultimately root for the romance, but there were some rocky moments, I think, throughout the book. And I think just in general, this is more of like a fluffy type romance, but, you know, May does actually have to deal with some of the consequences of her actions and think about how, I guess, her actions affect others. So I did enjoy that overall. And, you know, while this isn't my favorite Christina Lauren book I have read so far, I still enjoyed it and would recommend it. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Seven Devils by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth May. So we read this for, I think it was the December pick that was discussed in early January with the Space Sirens Book Club. And it was the one I nominated, and sadly I wasn't able to make the live show, but, you know, I was still pleased that this had been chosen. So this is a sci-fi book where we have this resistance that includes the former heir to the Empire and a mechanic/pilot. And these characters are tasked with infiltrating a ship and return this intel from the ship to the resistance. But they end up finding 3 fugitives. So essentially our characters must stop the Empire's expansion and save millions of lives. So I really liked this overall. It kept me like wanting to read it consistently throughout the book. It's not the most, I guess, unique plot concept. Like, certainly it reminds me of Star Wars in that we have like this resistance against the Empire. And, you know, I had seen comparisons to Rogue One, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. Like, generally, I guess, like, I agree with it in that it's like the same sort of, you know, resistance against the Empire plot. And I mean, maybe the tone is kind of similar to that, but yeah, like, I don't know, it's not necessarily like exactly the same by any means. We do have flashbacks throughout the book to Eris, who is the heir, who was the former heir to the Empire, and Chloe, who is this mechanic pilot person. And we also have this like present day timeline. So I really enjoyed learning more about Eris's background and what her life was like as the heir. But I think, you know, I think your enjoyment of this book may come from how much you like these flashbacks, because it does, like, they are fairly frequent, so it could take away from your enjoyment, I guess, of the overall story if you don't like these flashbacks. But for me, they worked really well, so I had a great time throughout the book. I did like the other characters that we meet as well. We have this sort of found family aspect, which I really appreciated, and we have some fabulous character dynamics. We also have some really good diversity here, you know, we have LGBTQ plus characters of color, you know, etc. So I liked them all. I think we also have, in terms of like sci-fi tech, there are some interesting, you know, things of that nature. One of the more interesting technologies, I guess, was this kind of like mind and emotion control type mechanism. I thought it was hard to tell that there were 2 authors here. Like, I thought the writing worked really well overall, and like, I don't think I could like necessarily tell if one author wrote one section or anything like that. So I thought the ending was definitely exciting, and it's definitely a series that I'll be continuing. I think it's a duology. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like that's what I remember reading. But yeah, so definitely enjoyed this one. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. So I listened to this on audiobook. So this is kind of a recollection of behind the scenes shooting Star Wars and her journals from filming. And I think this was where it was revealed that she had an affair with Harrison Ford. I've listened to one of Carrie Fisher's books before and thought it was really funny. She narrates them herself, which I think really helps because she was, I guess, hilarious. So the diary entries that we get here are actually read by her daughter, Billie Lourd. So I thought that was like a really nice touch that it was her daughter reading it as, you know, like younger Carrie Fisher, I guess. I thought it was mostly really entertaining and interesting to learn more about her life. Like, I think she was a very fascinating person, and she's like very frank about her, I think, struggles with mental health and just generally what it's like to be, you know, the daughter of famous people. I enjoyed the parts that dealt with like the filming and just generally being involved with Star Wars. Like, obviously I love Star Wars, so I don't think it's surprising that I enjoyed those sections. I thought the actual diary portions were not nearly as good. Like, I kind of struggled to get through them. And like, granted, I was listening to it on audiobook, so it wasn't really like as much of a struggle because I kind of had, you know, nothing else to distract me really. So I think like I still made it through that, but I think they just like weren't nearly as interesting. Like, it's a lot of just like very angsty sections and things like that. So I didn't particularly care for those parts, but thankfully it doesn't take up too much time. Like, I kind of thought that it would be woven, I guess, throughout the book consistently, which it really wasn't. Like, there was like an entire section kind of 3/4 of the way through maybe that were, you know, made up of these journal entries. So, and then we like jump back to Carrie as like an older adult, I guess. She's kind of like recounting this stuff and what happened, and just like some of her later experiences, I guess, with like going to like Comic-Cons and things like that. So overall, I enjoyed this. I don't know if I liked it quite as much as the other book by her that I read, which I think was Wishful Drinking. But, you know, like, I think if you're a fan of Star Wars in particular, you may really enjoy this. But yeah, I think, again, Carrie Fisher was really funny, so I would recommend it. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. So I buddy read this with Chase from Chase's Book Thoughts. And this is sort of a steampunk fantasy where our main character Senlin loses his wife at the tower and must navigate these ringdoms of the tower in order to find her. So I thought this was enjoyable overall. Like, I've heard a lot of very positive reviews from people that I'm friends with on here. So I kind of went in thinking that I might like this, but I was not sure because like steampunk seems to be, I think, more hit or miss for me, but this worked well for me, I think. It's an interesting writing style. It's easy to read and engaging, but also like very detailed, I think. It did keep me wanting to read throughout the book. And I really liked this setting. Like, each level, which is these ringdoms of the tower, feels really unique, and I am definitely curious to see what the other ringdoms are in the later books. In this particular one, we have this parlor, which is essentially a theater, and the baths, which are, they kind of remind me of like a Roman spa type setting, I guess. I initially really disliked Senlin because he feels really judgmental and naive, but I did really like his character growth. Like, I think, and like, I will say, like, this could certainly continue, but we understand him a bit more. Like, at the beginning, I didn't really get his relationship with his wife. And I was like, this seems really out of character, and also, like, Maria, his wife, seems like way too good for him. Like, what is going on here? And we do get to learn more about their relationship in general, and, you know, I think he kind of realizes that his preconceptions of the tower in particular are just like way off. So I liked him kind of coming to terms with what is actually real. So I did really like what we get to see of Maria, this wife. I do wish she was way more involved, so I'm really hoping that in later books we get to see her more. She seems very intelligent and like sure of herself, and I am just really hoping for more female characters. So I will say, like, that's kind of, I think, a bit of a downfall of this book. There's not that many great female characters. There's basically, you know, like Maria, who is loosely mentioned, and then we get Edith, who is kind of this, like, fellow Ringdom explorer. And I did like Edith, and, but again, like, it comes down to, like, I just want more of them. I think what I thought was pretty funny was this guidebook that Senlin has of the tower was just comical, just like reality versus what, you know, the guidebook has written, and like that. I feel like that's very accurate with real world guidebooks. Like, it'll tell you things and you'll talk to locals and they'll be like what in the world are you talking about? So it's just, I thought that was sort of realistic and enjoyable. I do think the ending was a bit rushed, but I'm still interested in continuing the series. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Snowspelled by Stephanie Burgess. So this is, like, I would describe it as like a historical fantasy set in this alternate world. You could probably describe it as like this Regency romance / fantasy of manners type book. So this is a novella, just so you all know. So Cassandra, our main character, recently lost her magic, and she's trapped in this snowbound house party in the Elven Dales and must deal with politicians, magicians, family, and elf lords. So, I mean, there's obviously more to the story than that, but I'm kind of trying to keep my synopses, you know, quick. So I thought this was very charming. I had mentioned, you know, it's a novella length, so it's a little bit shorter than I would have liked. I could certainly have used more development and generally more time in the world, but I know there are other, you know, novellas, or I think they're all novellas in this series, so, like, there are more things for me to explore to really get to know the world. I think the writing was delightful. It felt very cozy, and it's perfect for the winter. And I think generally the tone was pretty funny throughout. I really liked this romance. It's already established, so, you know, it felt really natural. There's certainly no insta-love here, which I appreciated. The plot is a bit straightforward. You know, there's only, again, so much you can do in this limited amount of page count, but I thought it was still very enjoyable. I liked that the women are politicians in this world, and the magicians are definitely like a boys' club. So our main character, Cassandra, was the first woman magician in this world, and she's kind of like, you know, breaking boundaries and becoming a mage until, you know, of course, she lost her magic. In general, I really liked Cassandra. She obviously like wants to forge her own path, and, you know, we see this with her becoming the first female magician. She's very intelligent. I liked what we got to see of the world. We have, you know, like elves, trolls, etc. And it just seems like so cozy, and I want to find out more about what's happening next. I think the resolution at the end of the book leaves things open in a direction that I want to explore. So I definitely will be continuing this series. Now we move to 4.5-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So this was actually a Christmas present from Angela from Literature Science Alliance. We did a little Secret Santa within the Space Sirens book club, and she got me and chose to get me this book, which I was very excited about. So this is a fantasy romance where our main character, Poppy, is the maiden, and her destiny is just out of her control. We also have Hawk, who is her guard, who ends up playing, you know, a larger role in her life than she necessarily anticipated. And then we also have this fallen kingdom that's rising again. So that's like the really brief blurb. I thought this was super fun. It's really easy to get into. It's sort of like an easy read. I'm definitely interested in this world and the characters. I thought there were some pretty funny moments and great banter. I think the world itself probably could have been a little bit more developed, but I'm interested in finding out what happens next. I think there are some definitely predictable moments, but I really liked that I guessed these correctly. I liked Poppy, this main character, a lot. You know, she's really sheltered, but she does take things into her own hands, like learning how to fight and things like that. So, like, even though I think a lot of, I guess, agency has been taken away from her because she is the maiden, she tries to reclaim some of that for herself, which I can, like, definitely appreciate. She's pretty strong and intelligent, I think, most of the time. Like, there are some questionable decisions here, certainly, but, you know, it happens. In terms of the romance, I definitely felt the chemistry between our characters, and I don't know, I'm still, like, kind of conflicted. Like, I think I root for it, but I don't know. In terms of Hawk, this guard, he's protective and certainly intriguing. There's, in general, you know, with this plot, we have some intrigue, and I like definitely enjoyed the threats that our characters face. I will absolutely continue on in this series. Like, it's just, I don't know, it gives me kind of like this cozy feeling, I guess, and I don't know, it just makes me happy, and I want to keep reading it. The next 4.5-star book I'll talk about is All of Mabel and Me, Life and Adventures with Two Very Good Dogs by Andrew Cotter. So Andrew Cotter is a sports commentator, and I don't know if you guys have seen his videos with his dogs on his YouTube. I'll try to remember to link the first one in there. But he has been, like, generally like narrating his dog's actions like it's some sort of sports event, and it's absolutely hilarious, and just like, you know, I love the labs. So it's really funny, and he has this like very dry wit, and it's just wonderful. Every time he comes out with a new video, it's just like I have to immediately watch it because I love it so much. So this book, I'm getting sidetracked here. Andrew Cotter is describing his life, obviously the dogs, Olive and Mabel, and what it's been like becoming internet stars. So I thought this was really hilarious. His wit, which is, you know, really great on camera, I thought translated really well to written form. It's really great to learn more about, you know, Andrew himself, and of course Olive and Mabel. I really enjoyed reading about his experience hiking in Scotland with his dogs. Mountain climbing and hiking in general is something I enjoy reading about, so I thought these were particularly interesting. I also thought it was fun to learn more about how these videos actually came about, and, you know, like what inspired them, why did he do that, and just how being, you know, internet famous can be strange at times. We get to, like I mentioned, we get to know more about Olive and Mabel and, you know, their differences in personalities, etc. So growing up, we had a chocolate lab, then a yellow lab, and then my parents currently have a black lab. And they all definitely have different personalities, and each of the different colors tend to have different personality traits. So it's, you know, really interesting for me in particular to see what that's like, you know, with these other dogs as well. We also get a lot of really cute pictures, so there's some when Olive and Mabel are puppies, and they're just adorable. I think the only reason I rated this a 4.5 star is that I did lose focus a couple of times, but I, like, absolutely recommend this. I think it's wonderful, and I, like, highly suggest that you watch the videos. So then our last book that we'll talk about today is a 5-star read, and that's Revenant Gun by Yoon Ha Lee. So this is the third and final book in the Machineries of Empire trilogy. So I did this as a buddy read with Lena from Sufficiently Advanced Lena and Angela from Literature Science Alliance. So we have this Mad General Jadao, and he's the most feared man in the galaxy. There's this plot to overthrow the calendar, which essentially is what governs people's behavior, and like I'm trying to like keep that really simplistic, but that's kind of, you know, kind of what it's doing. I'll leave it at that because this is the third and final book, but I thought this was such an inventive world. You know, in this one we have this like corpse calligraphy, so like each of these books there's like something where I'm just like, what in the world? Like, corpse calligraphy of all things, like that is something I would never have thought to like put together as a concept. So it was, you know, it's very exciting. The calendar system itself is super interesting, and I do think, you know, there's a bit of a learning curve, especially with the first one, because you're just kind of thrown into it and don't really have much explanation, but I think it gets significantly less confusing as the series progresses. Like, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what this calendar system means, and like what it means to be, like, you know, a heretic, I guess, in this world. I think this book had a lot of surprising moments. I will say it's less focused on some of the previous characters that we've seen before, and I do miss them, but we're focused more on Jadao here, which I think ultimately makes sense. Like, this seems to be, like, he is a big player in this world, and there are things that happen here where, you know, we need to explore him a bit more in depth. This is, again, continues to be very diverse, lots of, you know, LGBTQ plus characters, and there's like a very careful use of pronouns throughout the book, and it feels really natural. Also, you know, I think this book kind of goes over the importance of consent. We do have our robotic assistants here again, and I really liked their inclusion. The servitors are great. I think this is a really epic series as a whole. You know, definitely recommend it. I think it's possibly the most unique sci-fi I've ever read. And I just want more stories in this universe. Like, it's so good. So Lena, Angela, and I have been buddy reading the short stories in this world, and I just finished it last night, and it was, you know, I think not quite as good as the books themselves, but there were some like really great stories, and I'm just like, I need more. I need more. So yeah, I think in terms of the main trilogy, Revenant Gun was my favorite. So with that, those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today that I read in December, and hopefully, you know, I said that this is going to be short. I'm sure it's probably about the same length as the ones that I've been doing, so, you know, such is life. But anyway, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, have you seen the movie version of Clue? I do have a Discord channel if you want to join that. The link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.